Denver Broncos defensive coordinator Vance Joseph will be the hottest name in the upcoming head coaching cycle, but he should be the highest paid defensive coordinator. We'll tell you why here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into another episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network in the country. All thanks to the everydayers out there in Broncos Country. Thanks for making us your first listen, however you choose to do so. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports. You can check out my daily written work over there at milehighsports.com as I cover the team in person daily in Dove Valley. Joined as always by Sayre Bedinger, the longtime site expert, 10 plus years over there, predominantlyorange.com, where you can check out his written work as well. We got a lot to break down on today's episode of the show as we take a look at Vance Joseph becoming the hottest name for the upcoming 2026 head coaching hiring cycle here. We'll also tell you why the Broncos and their ownership group should make him the highest paid coordinator to keep him in the Mile High City. Plus, we'll talk about Talanoa Hufanga's big impact as Vance Joseph talked with Peter Schrager in a recent podcast interview. Then we'll highlight the Broncos' future vision here for Jahdae Barron as revealed by Joseph in his sit-down with Schrager. You're going to get all of that here on today's episode of the show, brought to you by our friends over there at Prize Picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Sarah, my man, great weekend. We didn't have to have any stress watches for the Denver Broncos over the weekend. They were off. They were watching. They were recouping from what has been a grind of a first half season, but they'll be back on the practice field here this week preparing for the Washington Commanders on Sunday Night Football. Vance Joseph, we got to hear from him a little bit early on last week where he sat down with Peter Schrager. And one thing is clear, as we know, where the Broncos at 9-2, what the defense has been able to do, what they did against Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs, Vance will be probably the hottest head coaching candidate name in this upcoming cycle.
I really think so. I mean, when you think about who is going to be available, the hot offensive coordinators around the league, right? There's just nobody that stands out to me quite like Vance Joseph. Now, I'm sure there's other candidates out there, and I know a lot of folks will say, well, you don't necessarily want to pair a defensive head coach with a team that's maybe unstable at the quarterback position or has a young QB that they want to develop. And the openings that are out there right now is obviously like the Titans, the Giants, and then you kind of start to think about what could become available. I do think that Vance will be interviewed by pretty much every team that has an opening, Cody, and I'd be shocked if he doesn't get a job offer. But to your point, and to something that we obviously want to discuss on today's show, the Broncos do have a bit of a recruiting pitch to be made or a bargaining chip that they have in their back pocket because there's no salary cap in the coaching realm. Vance Joseph doesn't necessarily have to take any old job that comes his way this offseason. He can afford to be patient, but how long do you wait to strike when the iron is already hot? That might be his dilemma here in the 2026 head coaching cycle.
And I feel like for Vance, when we reflect on his first time as a head coach, and look, I think there are a lot of Broncos fans that feel like, okay, Vance is a better coordinator than a head coach. That could be true, but that also, we haven't really seen Vance get an opportunity. I think you go back and we can reflect on it in hindsight now. When Vance was hired in Denver, that was the beginning of some instability within the front office structure, within the decision-making process above him. Vance didn't necessarily have a lot of say in that. And Vance was very reflective of his first time as a head coach, saying, if it were up, like if I could go back and redo it, I would have built with the offensive line. I would have built in the trenches first, versus their approach that they certainly had when he was there. And look, you still had that Super Bowl 50 defense for the most part. A few guys went on to the different opportunities where they got paid after the Broncos won, but you had to keep Talib. You still had Chris Harris Jr., still had some of those guys in the mix there, and Von Miller, obviously. But like for Vance, I very much feel like he will go to a place if there is stability within the organization where he's going to be given time to build. Like if there's a good foundation in place, you can go and build. I mean, Sarah, when these organizations that, as we talk about, have hired and fired different coaches over the course of the last 10 years, it's the same organizations, the same spinning wheel that we've seen. Doesn't make much sense there. But one thing that maybe stood out to me in that interview he did with Peter Schrager, which I think Broncos Country should check out if they haven't done so, he mentioned the vision for Denver. He talked about organizationally, just like why it is such a great place to be. And he echoed how great the players are, the locker room, the culture, ownership. to me, that is an appeal to stay. And I do know the Walton Penner family ownership groups there, they love him. So if he were to maybe be on the outs to potentially go somewhere to get a head coaching job, I still think that the Walton Penner family ownership group would make a pitch. I think that they should make a pitch to make him the highest paid coordinator in the game to keep him here in Denver with this group.
Isn't it funny how different things are now compared to when he was hired back in 2023, when it was supposed to be Sean Payton coming back to the NFL? He's bringing Vic Fangio and this all-star coaching staff with him wherever he ends up going. And obviously getting the job in Denver forces Vic Fangio to reconsider. And then you have this whole interview process with Vance Joseph and Rex Ryan and all these other candidates. And Broncos Country is like, don't bring back Vance Joseph, right? They don't want part two of whatever Vance had any part of in the first time that he was here, fair or not with the circumstances, right? So, and then everybody starts looking at, well, he hasn't even been that great of a coordinator, right? You look at his time with the Cardinals and, you know, teams like the Bengals and the Dolphins or whatever, you can look back at any stop and defensive rankings and all these. I don't say everybody, like, oh, it's not literally everybody, but this was kind of the majority resounding opinion. Hey, look at the numbers. He hasn't had great defenses even when he's been a coordinator. So what is it that everybody loves about this guy? Well, when you hear Vance Joseph talk to Peter Schrager, you hear him talk about players. You hear him talk about how important the vision is and how reflective he was on his previous time. You can just see how insightful he is and why so many people in the league love this guy and why he has ultimately been successful now with continuity on that side of the ball. I think that this is going to be such a fun thing to watch develop because Vance, I feel like watching this, Cody, I feel like he wants to be a head coach. I do. I feel like he's ready for that opportunity. And I think that it, like you said, it has to be the right situation from the top down, because what he experienced in Denver is the opposite of what you want. With that instability, you don't get to make all the decisions. You're kind of just going with the flow. This is going to be okay, I get to kind of have my say in all the major pieces of this because it's going to go the way that I envision it going.
And it's hard to find a dynamic with these ever revolving door organizations and all the teardowns and, you know, the foundations being not there really for a lot of those situations. Aaron Glenn's a first-time head coach. He's going to a Jets team where now with Darren Muji, I think, who's seen that process, they're going to have a chance there with Aaron Glenn. It's going to be a patient process, but it's also ownership is so important. And look, I think for Vance, he can learn so much from Sean Payton's approach of, you know, how important culture is, how important the ownership is for that. I just think that right now, like this is a dilemma here for Vance because, Sayre, at least from the outside looking in, from our perspective, yes, you want to be a head coach. Are you going to leave Denver? Is there a better situation out there for you to go personally right now than the defense that you have, the players that you get to coach, where your job, you get to just worry about the defense. You don't have to worry about all the craziness, the headaches of, you know, front office, the draft and all that. You just manage players and you have players who are just so bought into you. Denver is the most appealing position right now. I don't care what vacancy is going to be open. I think Denver is the best place here for Vance. And yes, like selfishly, I hope, you know, he gets to stay here because I think what he's done with the defense, how he calls it, where he's got the Broncos. I mean, I was watching the Colts-Chiefs game on Sunday. I'm like, man, that third down defense for the Colts stinks. Look what the Broncos, look what Vance has been able to do here in Denver against Patrick Mahomes and company, right? So I think that's more appealing. What's crazy is like, all right, I think the Walton Penner family ownership group can make him the highest paid. You know who the current highest paid coordinator is right now in the NFL, Sayre?
No, who is it? I don't know. I don't know.
It is one of the worst offenses in football. It's Chip Kelly of the Las Vegas Raiders making $6 million per year. You're telling me the Walton Penner family ownership group can't say, hey, we'll give you 8, we'll give you 10 to keep you here in the Mile High City. I think that would be very hard for Vance to turn on. Plus, he loves it here in Colorado. So selfishly, I mean, I think I want him to stay in Denver, but Vance does deserve a head coaching gig. And if he wants it and he feels like there's a place out there that is right for him, I'm sure he'll take it if offered that job. So we'll see how things plan out here for Vance Joseph this offseason. Broncos Country, but make sure you let us know your thoughts Would you like the Broncos ownership group to step up and make Vance the highest paid coordinator in the game? Make sure you let us know here in today's episode of the show. But coming up next, Sayre and I, we're going to talk a little bit more about what we learned from Vance's interview with Peter Schrager, including how impactful Talanoa, Hufanga, and Drake Greenlaw have been for this defense. You'll get that and more here on today's episode of the show. Broncos Country, today's episode is brought to you by our friends over there at Prize Picks. The holiday season is one of the best times for sports. You got bowl games, you got big basketball matchups, you got playoff pushes, and it's all happening at once. And while we're all making choices every day, one of the most fun places to make the right call is Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the easiest way to get in on daily fantasy. Just pick more or less on at least 2-player projections. Lock in your lineup, and you're in the game. It's simple, it's fast, and it's available in 45 states, including California, Texas, Florida, and Georgia. Prize Picks, they've even added an extra layer of excitement to the holiday sports schedule, where creating a lineup takes less than 1 minute, and the app makes the whole process smooth and intuitive. They have an early payout feature, which is a great bonus. When your lineup starts strong, you may get the option to cash out early. So download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. It's good to be right. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over there at Dewar. And I tell you what, I love the pair of Dewar jeans that I've got. I've got the Performance Denim Slim Straight jeans, and they are the most comfortable pair of jeans that I own because they look like a pair of jeans. They look like denim, but they feel like and they work and move like it's athletic wear. I love it. They're antibacterial, which means that your jeans, they stay fresher for longer, so you can wear them more and you don't have to wash them as much. And they're also made with CoolMax technology that regulates your body temperature and it wicks moisture. Dewar jeans, they feel stretchy without looking stretchy. And that, for me, is a huge plus. I can wear it to dinner. I can wear it out and about running errands, or I can just comfortably hang out at home in a pair of my Dewar jeans. Dewar, they're pioneers of blending technical innovation with everyday clothing. Simply put, Dewar makes the world's most comfortable pants without having to sacrifice style, and that is important. And you can check out Dewar in-store here in Denver at 2621 Larimer Street. Pick up a pair for yourself or as an amazing holiday gift, especially with Black Friday coming up. Mention my promo code LOCKEDONDenver in-store to get 15% off your first order, or check them out online at shopduer.com/LockedOnDenver for 15% off. That's shopduer.com/LockedOnDenver.
The Denver Broncos went after free agents in 2025 who could not only help continue to transform the culture, but bring their own flavor to it as well. Talanoa Hufanga and Drake Greenlaw have absolutely done that for this team. And Hufanga in particular, man, Vance Joseph had some really great things to say about him and a really interesting couple of details about the free agency process that led to the Broncos signing him, how they scouted him. Cody and I are going to talk all about that on today's episode of the show. But Broncos Country, want to say thank you to every single one of you for making us your first listen of the day every single day, and for helping make the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network out there. We appreciate you so much. Cody, let's talk about the additions that were made to this defense, because, of course, last year it kind of felt like, a little bit of a breakdown late in the season. We heard Sean Payton talk about too many free runners. You saw the Broncos obviously make a big change by benching Levi Wallace after a really bad game against the Browns. And they made some changes in the offseason, knowing that they were weak at the linebacker position, knowing that they had a chance to upgrade at safety. But even more than just getting a linebacker and a safety, they brought in a couple of guys in Drake Greenlaw and Talanoa Hufanga, who they know how to win games. They've been in big games. I was really interested by this portion of Vance Joseph's interview with Peter Schrager, because he was talking about the Broncos only were able to evaluate like 3 or 4 plays of Hufanga that would, cross over to Vance's defense. So they really bought into the person as much as they did the player in this instance, and it's paid off in a big way.
Yeah, and also a little bit of a glimpse, and this is something that Sean has said before, but I don't know if fans pay too much attention to it, just because, like, on Twitter, you'll see, like, George Pickens is a name, and everyone's like, oh, George Pickens, or like Brandon Ayuk and all the stuff that's going on in San Francisco right now. They're like, bring Brandon Ayuk to the Mile High City. You don't realize that these guys, like, yes, they value very good football players, but primarily they value guys who are going to be great additions in the locker room. They great teammates. And when you look at like what's gone on in San Francisco, what's gone on with Ayuk, I think we can shut that down now here by saying just wouldn't be a locker room fit based on the culture the Broncos have built. It's not a me locker room. It's a very much a team-friendly locker room. I'm in it every day during the regular season, and I can tell you just how close this group is. But Hufanga, I think you can say, has been probably the most impactful addition when you talk about on the field, but also the culture that you bring to the table here inside your locker room. Because think of it this way. How many guys, and there's been 2 so far this year, you bring in from other places, they come in and they become that voice. They become, a leader. They have captain-like qualities there. Hufanga was voted as a captain, Sayre, and he had barely even been in Mile High City as a guy, not even 4 months, from the time that he signed there initially. He has been so good. And I've had a chance to get to know Hufanga a little bit. He goes to a lot of the high school games here on Friday nights, takes the teammates out there to it. He and I, funny enough, Sayre, my high school, when I was a sophomore, we were in the playoffs against his high school team there. He wasn't in there yet. I think it was in 7th grade when I was in 10th grade there. But we had a little fun wager this year where my high school team played his in the playoffs. Once again, we did a little bit of a hoodie bet. He owned up to it. Obviously, my team won. So he wore it. Obviously, we talk high school ball. Great dude, though. But can you name a more impactful offseason addition that the Broncos have had, I think, just tangibly right away than Hufanga? I think you can make an argument for Brandon Jones, but, man, Hufanga, he's been next level. He's exceeded every expectation and more.
I think maybe the best addition to a defense around the entire NFL. And I say that not necessarily racking my brain over all 32 teams and thinking through, okay, who added who this offseason, but man, what he's brought to the table is so big. And like you and I have talked about, after almost every game, especially lately, it feels like he's just an inch or two away from not just creating a turnover, but defensive touchdown. So I feel like that's kind of bubbling beneath the surface right now. And it's more than just the splash plays too, right? There's the splash plays, of course, but it's that infectious toughness and the way that he plays with such a physicality. You and I talked when he was originally signed, and I've said this before, I think one of my favorite qualities about him is the fact that when he's on the field, it feels like you got 12 guys out there playing defense because he just covers so much ground. He's so instinctive. He makes plays on the ball. He does a little bit of everything. I was watching back too, Cody, some top 10 defensive highlights before the bye week. The Broncos posted a little video on YouTube. It's good to go back and relive some stuff. But, man, the plays that he made early on in the season, that it's so easy to forget now as we've gotten so much deeper into this year. He made so many big plays against the Titans, the Jets. I mean, he came through huge. And so I love what he's brought to the table. I think Hufanga, Cody, if anybody's out there, you're doing your Black Friday shopping this week, he's got to be a Jersey guy, right? I mean, he's definitely a Jersey guy for this fan base.
He feels like it too, and just the high character. Like, one thing that Vance said in his interview with Schrager was he's got the leadership, the aggressiveness. He plays with tenacity, physicality. I mean, he even made that, when talking about both Hufanga and Greenlaw, obviously you're bringing both those guys in from San Francisco, but Vance said here specifically, those guys have brought an attitude to our defense that takes us to the next level. And I think the value too is Vance says we have a young defense. He says these guys have played meaningful football games. These guys have played in big games. They've won in the playoffs. They've been to Super Bowls. That's so important for these other guys because you have veteran voices there. And the thing about that, what's scary is how Vance is pretty much talking about Greenlaw in the sense of, he's been on a pitch count since coming back, and that's not because of injury. That's just so he can catch up on the scheme. And they talked about his production in a small sample size. And in my head, I was just thinking, I was like, man, just wait till he's 100%, just schematically there. And he even made something, mention about the Chiefs game. And was like, I could do more, coach. I could do. He's like, no, you're helping us. Chill, just relax. These guys have brought a selfless attitude, a physical attitude. And now you're seeing, in today's game defensively, the Broncos are playing with this physicality that we haven't seen from them defensively really since that Super Bowl 50 year with those guys that they had there, which is harder, I think, to do in today's game, which makes it very, very impressive considering the pace that they're on.
It does. They're really those kind of enforcers. If you think about the Bass brothers from the Mighty Ducks, right? That's the type of guys that you're getting from Hufanga and Greenlaw. It's just two guys who are just bad dudes who have bad intentions out there. They want to hit somebody. They want to make the play. They want to be the enforcer and dictate the tone of a game, because otherwise the other team dictates it for you. And that's why you love having those types of guys on your defense, is because that mentality is infectious. We all saw in D3 the Mighty Ducks, right? Like Kenny Wu, the figure skater, joins the Bash Brothers, right? That's because their attitude is infectious. And that's what you want to see from a team like this in Denver, that, okay, yeah, you had a great defense last year. How can you get to the next level? These two guys help you do exactly that.
Come for the Broncos talk, stay for Sayre's famous pop culture references to some of the greatest movies and shows of all time. That's why you're locked in here to Locked On Broncos. Couldn't have said it better myself, brother. And Broncos Country, one thing we are going to talk about as well. Vance had a lot to say, including spilling the beans a little bit on the future vision for Broncos rookie cornerback Jahdae Barron. You're going to get that here on today's episode of the show. Broncos Country, today's episode of the show is brought to you, our friends over there at the Game Time app. The NFL season is back. It's in full swing. And honestly, there was nothing better than being in the stadium surrounded by fans cheering on your team, especially in the Mile High City. When it's third down, the stands, they shake. The water bottles in the press box, they shake. But let's be honest, sometimes getting tickets can be a frustrating hassle between queues, between login screens, and prices jumping at checkout. It can make things difficult for the diehard fan. But that's why I use Game Time, and that's why you should as well, because the Game Time app gives the advantage back to the fans. Game Time is fast, it's easy, and it's backed by the Game Time guarantee. Plus, you always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time, and you get it at the best price. Plus, all fees are included. So when you go to checkout, the price you see is the price that you pay without any surprise fees being added later on. They also have zone deals where you get to pick the section, and Game Time, they pick the seats, and you save big, especially if you want to go to the Broncos and Commanders game on Sunday Night Football this upcoming Sunday. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. When Jahdae Barron was brought to the table here for the Denver Broncos with the surprise first-round pick in this past year's NFL draft, everybody wondered what position he would play, what it meant for other players on the roster, and he's having a big impact right now in an underrated role as a rookie. But the vision for him going forward makes things very interesting for this Broncos defense. We'll break it all down here on today's show. Once again, I want to say thanks to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country for tuning in, once again, making us your first listen here. Sayre, I found it to be very interesting, too, because there's been a lot of discussion. You know, when we talk about the cornerback position, we talk about Riley Moss, the penalties, there's a lot of conversation about, well, just put this guy out there and bench this guy. There's a method to the madness here with this Broncos team, and the selfless approach I think you have in the locker room with these guys. And Jahdae Barron has kind of fit into the mix. Now, he's playing a lot as a slot and in the dime in terms of the nickel and dime packages. But Vance Joseph kind of spilled the beans on a very, very interesting development about what the vision is for him going forward beyond just his rookie season.
Yeah, and a long story short, and spoiler alert for anybody that hasn't seen that interview yet with Peter Schrager. And again, we encourage you to listen to the whole thing. A lot of great content in there from Vance Joseph. But he talked about how the vision long-term is to have him on the outside, which I thought was, you know, I mean, it's kind of obvious, right? When you draft a corner in the first round, always going to be one of your starters, and the starters play on the outside. But when you draft a guy and you already have two established starters, you're thinking to yourself, okay, short term, right? This is what we're looking at right now instead of what we're looking at down the line. And so with Jahdae, it's finding ways to get him on the field as a rookie. That's everybody's focus, right? But Sean Payton, I can't help but think about this, Cody, how many times he said during the NFL draft over the last couple of years, how with certain prospects on your board, you have a year one vision, you have a year two, year three, year four, etc. And he talks about how like some guys are year two or some guys are year. So I think about a player like Jahdae Barron, and as a rookie, a first round pick, you want him on the field. He needs to be on the field. He needs to be playing in some capacity. But beyond this season, the plot maybe thickens a little bit here, especially with the way that I know that there's a lot of debate about this topic. It might be a whole nother podcast that we do, but with the way that Riley Moss is, you know, leading all defensive backs in penalties, I mean, there is maybe a bit of okay, this is kind of interesting here with what Vance Joseph is saying.
Yeah, and look, certainly, you know, Riley said after the Chiefs game, he's going to have to find a way to make some adjustments. But if it does continue to happen, whether it's fair or whether it's not, You may have to look at just rotating things up. I think the idea of benching Riley Moss is stupid, but I do think that you can find ways to maybe rotate guys. What's a better way to challenge a guy than putting some pressure on him a little bit, right? Look, he's facing the pressure from the flags. When you got a rookie who Vance did acknowledge, like even with PS2 out, it depends on what Denver's defense comes out in. But he says basically when the Broncos are in their base personnel, Jahdae is a starter on the outside opposite of Riley, like when Pat has been out. And they said that they've loved what they've seen from him. Now, I think what has happened is you've seen this narrative on Twitter where, or even social media in general. I don't want to just pinpoint it to one place. Certainly we see it sometimes in our comments, but people are saying, well, Jahdae was a first-round pick. He's not seeing the field as much. It means he's a complete bust. What the Broncos have done in terms of their approach with him, Sayre, I found it to be very interesting because here's exactly what Vance said to Peter Schrager here, because we haven't seen a lot in the games, like, initially as much as I think fans had hoped for, but there's a reason behind that. And that's because of Denver's depth, the guys that they have that are already solidified here. He said here, if you play them too soon, rookies, and they have a lot of failure with live time, some guys don't recover from that. He says, my vision for him was to bleed him in slow and create failures in practice, not in games, so he can grow from those. And that is certainly something that we have seen. And I'll tell you this, being at training camp, we saw Jahdae making some mistakes out there in practice. That's where you want to do it. You want to make him and get him out of the way in practice. He's gotten comfortable with that, and now we're seeing him play well in the games. That, to me, is a good approach. If you have the depth, you can do that with very, very good players. And Barron is going to be a very, very good player here in the NFL.
I think so too. And he's even got a little confidence after that Chiefs game, doesn't he? I mean, we saw the post about Swift and get me on a track or, whatever he's saying. It's all funny and things like that. But yeah, he's got that swagger, that confidence about him, and that physicality that we talked about with guys like Hufanga and Greenlaw, doesn't he? I mean, we've seen him make some big hits this year. He was known for not missing tackles at Texas. So he's a physical guy. He's exactly what you want at the cornerback position. And I remember a lot of folks, I don't remember exactly who, so I can't give him credit, but I remember a lot of folks saying when he was drafted, hey, I think the best spot for him is on the outside, because remember at Texas, he kind of played everywhere, right? He started as a safety, moved into the slot. He plays outside. He plays all over the place. He's kind of a Swiss Army knife for the secondary, but it's clear that he has the skills, the size, the awareness, the physicality, and the ability to play as an outside corner full time in the NFL. And it'll be fascinating to see if the Broncos just kind of go back to what was previously when PS2 comes back, or if they do slide Jahdae to the outside and see what I don't know. I don't know what we're going to see, but I'm interested to find out.
Well, I also found it interesting that Vance said in terms of his defensive philosophy, especially with a guy like Pat, he says, look, Pat isn't just going to stay on one side. Like we can move Pat around. It doesn't mean we're always going to be playing man. Like Pat can move and play the nickel. Pat can play safety. Like same thing with these other guys. They view it as, hey, we know we have a guy who can, if you wanted to lock up, he's going to lock up and take away somebody. But we're not going to put our other guys in a rough position to do that. Like it's very methodical and calculated if the Broncos are going to dial up, more than a four-man rush at that point, right? They disguise it all the time. You never know who's dropping back into a zone. You never know when it's going to be man or cover zero. Like that's what the thing about Vance's scheme is, that they're not going to put other players in a position just because they have a strength of one, right? Obviously the front seven for Denver is a huge strength of theirs, and that helps out the secondary. When you have a guy like Pat, gosh, it makes it easier. But he said, we're going to be methodical and calculated with how we try to get after the quarterbacks, how we try to get stops. And I think that's why the defense for the Denver Broncos is humming right now. And I'm excited to see how it can continue to ascend. But I agree with you. I think maybe one thing to watch is as Pat does return, which we're going to find out this week. The Broncos are going to practice. I'll be out there. We'll see if Pat is back in the mix here for the team this week as they prepare to take on the Washington Commanders on Sunday Night Football. With that said, Broncos Country, that'll wrap up today's episode of the show. You always got Sayre and myself every single day, all year long. That's our promise to you here. Thanks for making Locked On Broncos your first listen every single day, and thanks for making the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network in the country. For all you everydayers, tomorrow, Sayre Bedinger, myself, we're going to sit down. We're going to talk about the state of the AFC after Week 12 as the Broncos get back on the field. Plus, we'll also highlight some players who are playing themselves into potential contract extensions this upcoming offseason. We'll break that all down and more on tomorrow's episode of the show. We'll see you then.